Questionable Ethics. Chapter 10, Less Than Desirable Consequences, Part 2. The fire crackled and snapped. The woods around me chirped and chattered into the night, and the Kirin around the campsite stared at me with wide eyes, their shocked faces illuminated by the glow of the flames. Besides Salvina's outburst, Autumn defending me, and the questions, the Kirin haven't offered much to say. Mostly because I believe they truly don't understand the gravity of the situation I was in. So, there they sat, bewildered at my tale so far. I'm sure Autumn had no idea I was going to open up like that. Hell, neither did I. It all came out so fast that I couldn't stop myself or even lie through my teeth to save a little bit of skin. It was like a runaway freight train that had jumped the tracks, which then took out a nearby peaceful neighborhood that was just a little bit too close to a sharp bend in the rails. But I said what I said, and it was all out in the open now. No secrets or regrets, all but water under the bridge now. Well, not really. Not yet, anyway. This was going to take some time to fizzle out, and I was screwed if I didn't regardless. I knew that these Kirin had no concept of modern-day politics. It was obvious. I mean, the closest form of government they had was basic tribalism and loose aristocracy. So, to explain the next part of my story was going to be a bit difficult, even for Autumn Blaze, who had listened to me talk about America and how it functioned for about half a week. Sure, I told him it was a horrible time and thousands of people died, but they don't and probably won't understand the true, terrible truth behind it all, the politics. Heck, me myself probably didn't even know the whole story of what happened. Maybe there was dirty deeds done behind dirty doors, sabotage from the inside or outside, or something completely alien to my understanding. But something in my gut tells me that I know what happened at Black Mesa, and with that being said, let me tell you about a friend of mine, I said as I pulled my head up out from my lap and looked at the Kirin sitting around the fire. What? Salvina questioned, perking her head up almost defensively as I spoke. I turned to her and spoke again. I said, let me tell you about a friend of mine. One that has been with me for a very long time. One that has watched over me without me even knowing he was there. One that might still be watching me right now. The Kirin would stir in their seats as they hastily looked around the area, their faces now stricken with obvious signs of unease. I continued. A silent watcher type that is always in a spot that I can't touch him, get to him, or speak to him, even if I tried my hardest or ran my fastest. A man. An alien. Thing that I like to call the G-Man. The atmosphere around the campsite grew thick, like I was speaking words that weren't meant to be spoken, like I was reciting passages from a book of the undead. I could feel and physically see the Kirin becoming increasingly worried as they listened to me. Their ears would twitch and their eyes would dart over their shoulders from time to time as I continued on with my exposition. And their fear is a good thing. The G-Man, he has the right to be feared by all and hated by me, and who knows how many others. He is a creature of unknown powers who works for unseen beings that I'm not entirely sure exist in this reality. Maybe he uses magic, maybe he's a god, maybe he could be something completely unknowable to me, to the rest of you, or to anyone. He's above any organization he claims to be a part of, and always, somehow, manages to gain access to places without needing to show any form of ID. At least, I think. He is, I don't know. To be truly honest, his existence is an enigma to me. And if you want me to be truly honest, His presence is a great big pain in the fucking ass. The Kirin would recoil slightly at my words that came spitting from my lips like hot magma. I could feel my anger rising as I spoke of him. And you said he's your friend? Fernflare asks quietly. I turn to her quickly and speak on instinct. He is not a friend. I was being facetious. I hate that creature with every fiber of my being. If hate could manifest itself for me, I would use that energy and strangle him to death with it. I would do unspeakable things to that cretin. He is my immortal enemy, and if I had the opportunity to take everything away from him and crush his body like a soda can, I would not only do it, but I would record it and watch that recording every night before I go to bed, knowing that blue suit wearing, briefcase trotting, paint breath smelling, manipulative, disgusting G-Man is dead, hoping that nobody will mourn his expiration. I let out a sigh and looked to the ground. By the moon, are you sure those tears were real, Autumn? I hear Salvina say as the air grows quiet and absent from my words. I look up to see her coiling inwards a bit as she stares me down, her eyes glancing up and down my body. She had lifted a hoof up to her chest and another hoof to the nearest Kirin near her, disgusted by what I said while trying to protect herself and her friends. I then saw Autumn rise again to defend me, but this time I was ready. I raised a hand to her and stood up from my seat, never leaving eye contact with Salvina. Let me ask you something, I said, resting my hands behind my back. I lean in slightly, looking down at her while I stand. She moves back slightly in response. For now, I stare her dead in the eyes. What if I told you that the G-Man is the single sole responsibility for completely destroying a multi-billion-dollar research facility, manned by 4,000 souls at its peak capacity? What if I told you, through his deception, lies, and manipulation of high-ranking military officers, plus some of the smartest scientific minds of my nation, a nation of which that has over 3 million people within its borders, managed to take an entire combat-ready battalion of 2,000 U.S. Marine Special Forces with artillery, light armored vehicles, tanks, jets, engineers, and attack helicopters, and force them into invading the multi-billion-dollar government-funded research facility that I had mentioned before, only to detonate a nuclear payload at the center of the complex to kill everyone and everything that had ever seen or heard the words Black Mesa. I say, raising my eyebrows to her as my eyes now stare deep into hers while waiting for an answer. I could see her fear staring back at me. She goes to open her mouth to speak, but can't muster anything to say. Her eyes now dart around the campsite, looking to the other Kirin as if asking for help. She was truly speechless, which is what I wanted. Saying anything now would be an insult to her intelligence. So she remained quiet but panicked as I yet again said so much in such a small time span. I kneel in front of her, and again she coils back, my initial rank over. I speak with a less condescending tone now. Salvina, I know with 100% certainty that if you were in my boots and saw the things I've seen, while knowing the things I know, you would hate him too. She was quick to respond. But I can't. I can only imagine the things you've seen. Not that I really want to, in all honesty. And again, I'm sorry for my comments, but you say such terrible things, and the human world, your world, just seems so dark and depressing. I then lean backwards and land on my rock and chuckle as I do. That's because it is, Salvina. My world, my personal world, to those looking in from the outside, manifests to them like a dumpster fire. What is normal to the spider is chaos to the fly. It's not an easy life. The one I live, it's filled with terrible things, But at the same time, there is so much behind the horribleness, behind the danger and the death. There is so much experience and life lived and knowledge gained. So many amazing things that triumph over the darkness and fact that I could never cover it all in one night. But I personally feel that it is necessary for you all to understand why I am the way I am. If I am to live here amongst you, I turn to Autumn, who looks at me, her face aghast with shocked emotion. I gave her a look. I pull up an eyebrow as if asking her if it was a good idea to keep talking. She seemed to understand my intentions, and the aghast look in her face turned to a stiff upper lip, and she gave me a nod. I then turned back to the group, who are now all trying to get in a seat that gave them a better view of me. Their fear had been somewhat stomped out by their curiosity. It was as if these four Kirin, including Autumn, had never really engaged themselves with outsiders before. I respected these Kirin. They may be freaked out, but they're willing to listen and learn. Maybe they have indeed been starved of real talk for a long time. And so, I gave them what they wanted, and I spilled everything out in front of them. I talked about my life before I joined the USMC. I talked about high school, and getting my car, and working my first job. I detailed my life experiences in boot camp when I joined the military. I talked about my military career up until the point of me joining the HECU. I talked about Fort Santiago and the training we were given, and I talked about my new drill instructors and teachers. I talked about seeing the G-Man around the base many times, talking to high-ranking officers ranging from the battalion section heads to the battalion commander himself. I then talked about how after not seeing the G-Man for a while, I noticed a drastic change in our training, and about hearing through the grapevine about Black Mesa from some of the medical corpsmen in the battalion BAS. Then I talked about the PCVs we were issued from Black Mesa. I talked about how they worked, and said that Black Mesa made these vests from the same technology they had already adapted for their own personal use and research. Trying to explain how these vests work was like pulling teeth with Fern. She just kept asking questions, even after Petrus was honest with her and saying that they would be here all night if she kept on asking these things. But they were good questions, so I didn't mind explaining what I could. Much to Sektra's enjoyment, who was fascinated by the PCV, it seemed she enjoyed the new technology I had brought with me, even more than Fern. After that, I moved on to Black Mesa itself, the elephant in the room at this point. After all, I could only talk about Fort Santiago so much. I talked about how, despite us already pretty much knowing where we were heading, our chain of command had decided to keep us in the dark about the details of our mission. I then explained how my Osprey was shot down while en route to our landing zone. Yet again, Fern asked questions, and Siktra loved it. This time, it was about the V-22 Osprey VTOL. Explaining as much as I could about the aircraft, I told them what squadron they were a part of, Squadron VMM 360 Made in Heaven. I talked about the nose paint that my Osprey had. It was a depiction of a head and shoulders shot of Freddie Mercury singing into a microphone with the word champion beneath it in big bold letters. I then had to explain who Freddie Mercury was to Autumn. After all of that was said and done, I moved on with the conversation. For the next couple of hours or so, I spilled the beans. I discussed with them everything that I saw, did, or heard about. I talked about what the science team at Black Mesa was doing, what they were doing in Zen, and all of the freaky alien creatures I had come across that I had to get rid of. I unfortunately told them about how many of the scientists I came across were terrified of me, and were too old or frail to fight, and just wanted to be rescued or left alone. I said this, then reiterated that our orders were to silence the facility. But after this, I then said that the G-Man was the one that sent us there, and that he was probably the one that caused the accident to begin with, for whatever twisted reasoning he had. At first, they didn't understand. They couldn't understand how one man could cause so much destruction. I tried to make them see. I tried my hardest to explain the complexities of human politics and the backstabbing bureaucrats. I did my best trying to explain the complexities of modern warfare and how military orders flow down the chain of command, and, worst of it all, I undertook the task of trying to convince them that everywhere I went in that godforsaken building, he was watching me, and possibly others as well. I said he was like an all-seeing eye that was evaluating me, seeing what kind of man I was, and what I was made of, seeing if I could be of greater service to him. And finally, I stated with furious anger that in order for him to judge whether I was a good Marine, or a good fighter, or a good leader, for whatever pet hamster project he was working on, thousands of innocent people had to die for no greater cause than his own selfish desires. And after us meeting at that campsite for the rest of the week, and even into the next week, did they slowly begin to understand where I was coming from. And before I knew it, I had spent 9 days here in this world, and as the ash and the charcoal from the fire grew in size, and each passing day, their quest for knowledge grew as well. I could see it and hear it in the way that they talked, in the way they asked questions. I saw it in how they grew even closer to me physically, and more curious about some things that in the end, even I didn't know about. Questions that I wanted answers for as well, like, what was it all for? What does the G-Man want from me? And why does he always hide from the confrontation? And as we talked and talked those days away, as 9 turned into 14, those 5 Kieran got closer to me, not only physically, but hopefully emotionally as well. I felt I was doing the right thing telling them all of this information. It was the only true way I was going to be able to adapt to them, to dealing with who I was. It was the only way I could see myself living among them without this overbearing guilt weighing me down, even if only in the end. I felt like shit. I still feel guilty and angry for the things I did, and for the things that were done to me. I would never forget. But, I mean, I could at least try, you know? After all, they're good listeners, and luckily, they have me to listen to, because I'm sure if it was a scientist or a security guard telling them the tale of Black Mesa, I would be painted as the villain. And after time went by, the Kieran understood why they might be. But, in the end, the radio was no longer even a part of the conversation, and we had completely forgotten about its significance. Even I forgot about why it was important, and why I wouldn't remember why it was, for a long time. There we go, everybody. There was the next chapter, or well, part, of Questionable Ethics. I hope you all enjoyed it this time around, and this time I actually got my sound shield up. Sorry if sometimes there was just like a few gaps and all that. Right now, I have not really been mentally in the head, because just yesterday I was at the doctor's office and passed out and hit my head pretty hard. So, yeah. But I'm still gonna try to uphold the schedule. And I love to read your comments, so please send them, because I'll try to respond as best as I can. Also, for the crazy rabbit army guy, your idea was great, let me tell you that. But I just can't pull it off, man. So, if you ever have someone you want to write that with, you can get in contact with me somehow, send me the doc, and I'll check it out. But in that meantime, thank you everybody for listening. Leave a comment or two, I'll try to respond. But have a good day and stay golden.